Have you just found yourself marveling at your video footage, thinking you've captured those perfect moments, only to realize that the real challenge begins with editing? If that sounds familiar, you've landed in the perfect spot. Welcome to my beginner's guide to video editing. My journey started back in my teenage days, editing skate videos, wrestling with my computer and learning everything the hard way. But guess what? You don't have to go through that. I'm here to guide you through the entire process, from picking the right tools and cutting for a clear narrative to enhancing your videos with effects and audio that doesn't make viewers reach for the mute button. Are you ready to transform your footage into something magical? Let's dive in. When you edit your videos, you don't want your computer to get in your way. That's why you should invest in decent editing hardware over time. Luckily, it doesn't have to break the bank, so here are a few recommendations. The first thing you should look at is your disk. Does your computer still use an HDD or does it already have an SSD? If it's an HDD, that will certainly slow your video editing down, as reading files is slow on those drives. In that case, it makes sense to buy an external SSD. You will find some recommendations in the description below. Regarding the disk space, I recommend at least 512GB or more. The reason is that videos today should at least be 4K resolution, and those files require a bit more disk space. If your computer doesn't have that much, it's best to get an external SSD as well. Regarding your computer, I strongly recommend going with Apple. If you're on a budget, look for a used M1 or M2 Mac Mini, ideally with 16GB of RAM or more. 8GB can work for simple videos, but I wouldn't recommend it. For complex projects, 32 to 64GB of RAM are even better. I also have a little tip for very slow computers in the project settings and preparation part of this tutorial, so keep watching for that. If you would rather use a laptop, the M1, M2 and M3 MacBook Airs do really well, especially if you apply the thermal mod, which is quite popular here on YouTube. I will link some tutorials on how to do that. The reason those Macs are so good for editing is that the M chips use a special architecture that removes many bottlenecks that other chips have. That gives a lot of performance for video and photo editing, while keeping the power consumption low and the device is small and affordable. Now, Macs are known as expensive, but considering the performance of the Mac Minis and MacBook Airs, that has actually changed. I would only really invest more money into their Pro machines if you work on bigger projects with lots of effects, etc. in the future. If you want to go the Windows road, make sure to get a computer with a dedicated graphics card that supports the HEVC 10-bit codec. Otherwise, you will run into performance issues down the road. You will also want to get at least 16GB of RAM, but 32GB or more is better. Next, you want to choose your video editor. Be careful when doing so. There are some video editors out there with shiny features at low prices, but they will likely cause problems down the road from my experience. And by directly learning one of the big editing apps, it's also better in case you want to start freelancing, because there are a lot of... Ted, I know you want to be in a video, yeah. It's also better in case you want to start freelancing, because there are a lot more job offers for those. The video editing app I recommend is DaVinci Resolve, as it's free to start with and only costs a one-time payment of $300 to get all features, and it will take a long time until you really need them. You will also spend less money on plugins, as it comes with most needed features included. Final Cut Pro is also a nice editing app and easier to use, but you can only use it for free for 90 days. Final Cut Pro is a bit better for small screens, so if you edit a lot on a 13 or 14-inch MacBook, you might want to look into that, but Resolve works as well. Adobe Premiere is also quite good, but many people leave it because it's pretty buggy and the subscription costs a lot over time. I wouldn't recommend it anymore. The good thing is that the basics are quite similar in all video editors. You always find a timeline, a preview window, media folders and an effects panel, what makes switching between editors not too complicated. Certain functions are called and work differently, and navigating the timeline also works a bit different in each editor, but if you understand one editor and you got the basics right, you will also be able to switch to others in the future. So don't worry, but get DaVinci Resolve, it's just the best. Now that you've got your computer and software ready and captured all your footage, it's time to prepare your video project. That makes it easy to find everything. I always have one folder for each project I'm working on. Inside of that, I use subfolders for A-roll, B-roll, graphics, music, sound effects and the thumbnail. If you're not familiar with A and B-roll, A-roll are the shots where I talk into the camera and B-roll are the shots where I show what I talk about. I find it important to separate these video files, as the A-roll creates the storyline of the video. So preparing them makes it easy to create the story in the timeline quickly, even before getting into the visuals. Sometimes I also shoot vlogs in chronological order. In that case, I throw all the footage into one folder called vlog. I will come to this way of editing a bit later in this tutorial. When I shoot random footage which is not for a specific video, I save those files in my footage folder, where I have folders for each camera and subfolders for each location. This way I easily find all the footage when I work on projects and want to insert it somewhere. Which folder structure you use is up to you as long as you can find everything quickly, so feel free to add or remove folders based on your needs. It's also important to keep backups of your files. To do so, an external SSD is best for video footage you're currently working with or need in the near future. For long-term storage, external HDDs or a NAS server make more sense to save costs. Now it's time to set up your project in your video editor. First you have to create a new project and select your resolution and frame rate. To get started, I recommend the standard 4K resolution at 3840 by 2160 pixels. Every video editor has a preset for that. The frame rate depends on what you used in your camera, but should either be 24, 25 or 30 frames per second. You will learn more about frame rates in my videography basics guide. I will leave a link in the description below. After setting this up, it's best to import all your media files into the video editor. This way you can stay within your editing app for the entire edit, which saves time compared to dragging each clip into the timeline from your computer's file manager. Ideally, keep the same folder structure when importing the files so you find everything easily. If you work with a slow computer, you can also create so-called proxy files after the import. Just right-click the files and select Generate Proxy Media. Proxy files are small, low-resolution files that are easier to handle for slow computers, so you can edit fluidly without breaking the bank. And now it's finally time to start editing. In DaVinci Resolve, you find multiple pages at the bottom of the app. You just edit your files on the media page to the left. For editing, you can use the Cut and Edit page. I personally only use the Edit page as it's more capable. There are two ways to approach your edit. You can either edit chronologically or in the A and B roll style. Editing chronologically works best for vlogs and videos you recorded in the chronological order of the video. That's also the way Casey Neistat edits his videos. To edit chronologically, simply drag all files into the timeline so that they all appear in the correct order. After that, you directly cut the footage down, drag music into the timeline and add titles and effects, so when you reach the end of the timeline, the video is essentially finished. This is the fastest way of editing, but only works if you recorded both your A and B roll in chronological order. Of course, you can change the order up a bit. The other way to edit your videos is to start with the A roll and put the B roll on top later. This works better for many videos as you often end up recording the A roll separately from your B roll. So the clips would not be in correct order when you drag them into your timeline. To edit in this style, you drag the A-roll and eventually voiceovers into the timeline and cut it down so that it all fits well and you would essentially have a pure talking head video ready. After that, you start again from the beginning of the timeline and insert all the B-roll clips, titles and effects. That makes editing a bit slower as you have to go through the timeline multiple times, but it's the best choice for many videos and also best for editing documentaries as things often don't happen chronologically. Luckily, this way of editing got a bit faster thanks to AI transcription tools. Tools such as Descript, Gling and text-based editing in Resolve Studio transcribes your A-roll footage for you, and you can edit the A-roll by editing the text. They can even automatically remove repetitions, pauses and filler words. The results are usually not perfect, but you have to do a lot less work to make it good. AI or not, you will always end up in your timeline to cut your videos the way you want. So how do you use the timeline? It's quite straightforward. The timeline shows the time of the video from left to right. You click to move the playhead wherever you want to make a cut. Important to notice that the smallest time measurement after hours, minutes and seconds is frames. So depending on your project settings, 1 second of video equals 24, 25 or 30 frames. Practically, this means that you can edit very precisely by using the left and right arrow keys on your keyboard to go through the timeline frame by frame. I used it a lot when I edit to music to make cuts on the beat or to cut the A-roll in between words if I ramble too much. You will find icons around your timeline to perform actions like cutting, but I recommend using keyboard shortcuts instead, as that speeds up your editing quite a lot. The most common shortcuts are for cutting, also called razor, and trimming. Cutting means the clip gets cut at the position of the playhead, and trimming means that the clip gets cut at the position of the playhead and the rest of the clip towards the beginning or the end is automatically removed as well. I've assigned cutting to X and trimming to Z and C on my keyboard so that it's easy to remember and quick to access. I've also assigned the N key to turn snapping on or off. Snapping means that clips automatically snap to cuts, which can be in your way for precise edits. An important feature for editing your A-roll is also increasing the playback speed. You play your video back with normal speed with space, and by pressing F you can increase the playback speed. Each time you press F it doubles. That's good for saving time listening to your A-roll. The standard for that is actually the L key, but I assigned it to F to be closer to my trimming keys. You can assign these shortcuts however you want, but if you want to save some time, you can download my shortcut file for DaVinci Resolve for free, so your keyboard shortcuts are exactly as mine. The link is also in the description below. Start editing your video by cutting the A-roll down using those keys to save time. If you edit chronologically, do the same with the whole vlog. It's important that you remove all the repetitions, pauses and filler words. You can also remove unimportant parts to keep the viewer engaged. It's easy to drift off when talking to the camera, that's why it's important to be aware of that in the edit and remove everything that's not informative, moves the story forward, or is at least entertaining. When I edit A-roll, I also leave gaps wherever I want to put some B-roll later. I put titles describing the B-roll footage in these gaps so that I know exactly what I want to put where. You can even put titles on top of your A-roll footage everywhere where you want to add B-roll later before you shoot it, so you know exactly what B-roll you need to shoot. That's probably the quickest way of shot listing your video. And that leads us to editing the B-roll of your video. If you edit chronologically, the B-roll is already in your timeline, usually between the talking head parts, so you only need to cut it shorter and match it to music. But you can always take some of those clips and drag them on top of your talking head shots to show what you're talking about. If you didn't edit chronologically and you only have the A-roll in your timeline yet, you have to drag each B-roll clip into the timeline from the media browser. You can either drag it on top or between the A-roll clips. On top to show what you're talking about or to make it less boring to watch, and in between the talking head parts to move the story forward or to transition from one part of the video to the next. Most of the time you want to cut the beginning and the end of every clip, as these are often shaky or not well positioned. Another important tip for editing B-roll is called kill your darlings. That means that you often have some shots that you really love but that just don't fit the story or aren't necessary to deliver the information. While it feels hard to delete these shots, it's best to remove them because the story comes first and what doesn't fit has to go. So if you love a shot but it doesn't fit, remove it from the timeline. Yes, that sucks, I know it from experience. But there are a few more tips when it comes to cutting your B-roll. Let's get into the first one. I already mentioned matching your clips to the music. What I meant with that is called cutting to the beat. After you insert music into your timeline, you want to ensure that your clips are cut to the beat of the music. You do that by playing through the music, and whenever you hear a beat or a change of chords in a place where a cut would make sense, use the left and right arrows on your keyboard to skip back and forth frame by frame to hear exactly where the beat is. Then make the cut and it fits perfectly. But enough talk for now, we're going on a hike soon in that fog. I think we won't get many of the views, but it will be epic. Enjoy the footage! Pacing describes the speed of your cuts. Sometimes you want your video to be fast and sometimes to be slow. Slow parts are generally good to emphasize important information and let the viewer take it in. Fast parts are more attention grabbing and therefore good to spice things up, change locations and move the story forward. If your whole video is only fast or only slow, it can become boring to watch. To get pacing right, it's best to watch lots of videos and movies while being aware of its pacing during certain parts. There are no fixed rules for that, your gut tells you what's right. Sometimes even suddenly stopping the music when something unforeseen happens can do a lot as well to tell your story better. Another technique that makes your edit better is the match cut. A match cut means that you put different clips behind each other that have the same or similar objects in the same place. That works a bit like a transition as it feels like the clips are connected. Similar but not the same as match cuts are focal points in your clips. Each clip usually has a point of attention where the viewer naturally looks at. It's called the focal point. By putting clips together where the focal point is in the same location, you make it easy for the eyes to go from one clip to the next. That doesn't work for every cut without becoming boring to watch, but try doing it when you can. Similar to match cuts is also continuity editing. That means that when you show two clips with different angles of the same action, the second clip should start where the first clip ends. A simple example would be two hiking clips. After cutting the end of the first clip, the second clip should start with my legs in the same position as in the end of the first clip. That also counts if I hike in different locations, not just for different angles of hiking in the same place. Try to use this technique wherever you can, as it makes your edits flow a lot better and it feels more natural. My last B-roll editing tip is L and J cuts, which you can actually also use for A-roll. An L cut means that the audio of the first clip still plays at the beginning of the second clip. J cut means exactly the opposite, the audio of the second clip already starts playing towards the end of the first clip. These cuts are good to transition from one place to the next, because the viewer expects a cut if he hears audio of something that's not currently shown, but it also works great with A-roll to shorten the overall video a bit. You do that by only selecting the video part of one clip without the audio. In Resolve, simply press the Option key on Mac or the Alt key on Windows while clicking on the video clip to do so. Then trim the beginning or the end of the video clip and remove the space in between the clips. The audio moves under the clip next to it and you've created an L or J cut. To protect the audio part from the other clip, select the audio part before trimming by holding the Option or Alt key again and drag the audio one track down. Then do the L or J cut. So with these tips and techniques, you're well on your way to create engaging videos, but remember, the key to great editing and practice is experimentation, so don't be afraid to try new things and develop your own style. After finishing your main edit, you might want to insert titles and effects. Titles are quite easy, just select the title with the animation you want in the title panel and drag it into your timeline. From there you can adjust your font, size, etc. When it comes to effects, I want to urge you to not overdo it, because effects are not always as cool as you might think during the edit, and the effects that you should know about and that are quite safe to use are usually the rather seamless ones. First, you can use the inspector panel to make adjustments and add animations to your clips. For example, you can crop in a bit and change the position to improve the framing in case you didn't nail it in camera. Using this technique, you can also fake camera movement and zooms. To do that, there is a feature called keyframes. Behind each option, you find a keyframe icon. Let's say you press the one behind zoom. It saves the zoom value you see for the current time in your timeline. From there, you can skip to another time of this clip in your timeline and change this value, which creates another keyframe and automatically animates in between. That's how easily you can create a zoom effect. You could also remove the zoom effect, zoom in a bit, and use keyframes to animate the position to add a camera pan animation. Great to make certain clips a bit more interesting to watch or emphasize something with a zoom. When it comes to zooms, you can do that even quicker by activating the dynamic zoom feature below. This automatically adds a zoom to the whole clip length. A bit below that, you also find the label Speed Change. As you might have guessed, there you can change the speed of the clip for slow motion or time lapses. Important when using that is to be aware of the frame rate you shot your video in. You will learn more about that in my videography basics tutorial under frame rates. The link is in the description below, and yes, it's free here on YouTube. The tool itself is simple. Just type in a percentage to speed the video up or a lower one to slow it down. Under direction, you can also reverse the clip, which can sometimes come in handy. Further below, there's also the stabilization tool. That's important as you will always have a few clips that are just not smooth enough. So whenever there's too much shake, play around with the settings here until it looks smooth. There's also the effects panel, which offers some basic transitions and effects, which can be useful sometimes, but they are oftentimes a bit too basic or you simply need more. That's where Motion VFX comes into play. Motion VFX has been a game changer in my editing workflow, offering a suite of plugins for Final Cut Pro and DaVinci Resolve that enhance every project I work on. Let's say you want to add an old film frame look to tell a story of your past. Just use the M-Film Look plugin, drag a frame on top of your footage, make some adjustments and you're done. Want some fancy whip or zoom transitions? M-Transition Zoom got you covered. Looks cool, right? Or you need some titles and shapes for your channel or tutorials. Mtutorial and the Mtuber plugin will help you a lot. I actually use their plugins extensively in this video for that. For Final Cut Pro users, they even offer rotoscoping and surface tracking, which are must-haves for many effects and certain color grades. But the main reason why I love Motion VFX is that their plugins still work many years after purchasing them, because they regularly update their plugins via the M-Installer app. Many other plugins I bought before stopped working after a few software updates of my video editor, but with Motion VFX plugins I never had any issues. I will leave links to my favorite Motion VFX plugins in the description below, together with a 10% discount code, so definitely check them out. Native effects that I mostly use are the crossfade transition and the solid color generator. They are basic but quite useful if used right. The solid color generator together with the crop options, for example, is useful to hide imperfections in parts of your footage, such as the strong vignette I got from a filter in this shot. Most other effects I add in Resolve, such as masking and tracking, are done on the Fusion and Color page. They would be too much for this video, so if you're interested in learning more advanced techniques like those, check out my DaVinci Resolve course. You will also find a link to it in the description below. An often overlooked but very important part of your edit is also the audio. That can be complicated, but in the beginning it's just important that you get the basics right, which essentially means having the correct levels, because you don't want your music or sound effects to be too loud. To make sure that it fits, simply do a right click on the clip and select Normalize Audio Levels. Then select the YouTube preset or the 1770-1 preset if you don't publish on YouTube. That ensures that your voice is not too loud or too quiet. To further enhance your voice, turn on voice isolation. This feature removes background noise using AI, which works pretty well most of the time. After that, adjust the music so that it's not too loud when you speak. It helps to use keyframes for that as well, to make the music louder when you don't talk and quieter if you do. When I'm not talking, I usually set the audio level of the music to between -5 and -10 decibels, and when I'm talking between -20 and -30 decibels, depending on the track. The most important thing is that the music isn't too loud and doesn't distract from your voice. So don't look too much on the numbers and choose what sounds right. If you really want to spice up your videos, adding sound effects can make a huge difference, because your video really comes to life with that, but it also requires a lot more effort to do it well, so I wouldn't recommend doing that in your first video. However, if you're interested in diving into that, watch some tutorials here on YouTube. Great platforms to find good music and sound effects without having to worry about copyright claims are Epidemic Sound and Artlist. That's also where I get all of my music from. You will find links to both platforms in the description below. Now, the last step before your video is finally finished would usually be color grading, but to be fair, you should ignore this step in your first few videos because it's just too much. Just shoot a normal picture profiles in your camera when you get started so that you don't have to do much grading, because this will save you a lot of time, allowing you to focus on learning everything else. But if you want to learn more about color grading, I have quite a few videos on this channel. Again, links in the description below. And you will also learn more about color grading in my DaVinci Resolve and my Final Cut Pro color grading courses, so check them out as well. Finally, it's time to export your video. You do so on the Deliver page of Resolve. I don't recommend using the standard YouTube preset, as it generally doesn't do a good job. Instead, I recommend using the H.264 master preset. Enter the title and select a location for your video file, and then click on Audio and open the audio normalization part. There you can check Normalize Audio and select YouTube from the list. This will automatically normalize your audio for YouTube, so it won't sound too loud after uploading. After that, click Add to Render Queue and then Render All in the right part of the screen. Wait a bit and your video is ready. If your computer is fast enough and supports H.265 video on the hardware side, you can also select H.265 instead of H.264. This gives slightly better quality, but it's usually not noticeable unless you have very specific clips in your video. If you have problems exporting, try the ProRes 4:2 option. Those files are huge but require less processing, which can sometimes help with the export. You have to compress those files after the export though if your internet is not fast enough for uploading and to save storage space. A good free app for that is Handbrake. So, I guess you learned something today. That was a lot of information, but those are all the basics of video editing, and if you become proficient at these skills, your videos will be good even without fancy effects and transitions, because if the foundation of your video is already poor, all the effects in the world won't improve it. You've probably seen some examples of this already on the internet, right? The important part now is to develop a good feeling for edits, and that only comes with experience. So edit a lot of videos, watch more tutorials, and also watch many videos that are similar to what you want to create, and pay attention to how they are edited so you can apply those techniques to your own videos. Of course, that doesn't mean that you copy in the first place. It's more like learning to play a guitar. You first play songs that already exist to learn, and when you're good at that, you start writing your own songs. So this will be a long journey, but it's worth it because the learning curve in the beginning is very steep, which makes it the best time really, because every edit that improves makes you proud of yourself. So enjoy this journey, it's a lot of fun, and of course subscribe for more tutorials. Also check out my playlist, as I already have lots of free tutorials available, and I will see you soon. Bye!